Welcome to the Orange Tea, where we explore thought leadership on performance and wellness to insights on modern healthcare. This is your space to think holistically and grow intentionally. Hosted by Stephen M. Perry, founder and CEO of Kymanox, we unpack ideas that shape the future, build exceptional teams, and create lasting impact. Learn what it means to be a T-shaped professional, broaden perspective, deepen expertise, and abreast of innovation, just like the people who make Kymanox a leader in the life science industry. Today we're talking about obesity, diabetes, and long-term solutions that go beyond GLP-1 medications. Joining the conversation with Stephen are Josh Perry, who you may remember from our last episode, and Jesse Kessler, founder and CEO of Heuro Health. Heuro Health offers a 24-month program designed to leverage neuroplasticity, habit retraining, and personalized coaching to help individuals not only lose weight, but also transform their behaviors and mindsets for lasting success. So let's find out more about this topic. Here's your host, Stephen Perry.
So Jesse, can you talk a little bit about how the Heuro Journey addresses mindset?
It goes even further than mindset, right? We're really unpacking what the brain means to our overall health and wellness, right? And I think historically we treated mental health and physical health as disparate issues, and really they are so hyper correlated. And we're really just uncovering what that really means. But if you think back to when we talk about habits and habit formations, unfortunately, neural pathways, which is what dictates what we do and how we do it, unbeknownst to us, it's what we call automaticity. These are habits that are learned from, when you're young. And if you think about, not to go too far off topic, but the school system and what we eat and how we eat is not the best, right? So you're learning habits very early on that you don't even realize that carry forward into our adulthood. And there's been studies done where if you look at some of these charter schools that actually serve quality foods, I mean, truly, farm to table foods, high nutritional value, kids aren't falling asleep in classes. They're far more alert. They're not as disruptive. There's enough data and science that says, quality food is one of the most important steps we can take in our overall health and well-being, including our mental well-being. Your brain is a muscle and it needs quality food, right? And the problem is trying to acknowledge those habits and then rewire your brain and retrain your brain to do new, healthier habits. It's challenging. It's challenging and it takes time to do. And the system has to be kind of inverted in terms of really looking at your mental well-being, these habit formations, and how they're relevant and correlated to our physical health. And then once an individual understands that, there is a real commitment that needs to be made by the individual. There is no easy button that I can just fix a problem and I'm done. It takes commitment. And I think that's what we're also learning too, is that people have got to play their role in their part.
Josh, can you talk a little bit about the habits?
Yeah, well, I love how Jesse said it's deeper than mindset, because that's the things you and I have been talking about, is getting to the level of the nervous system and how the mind and body are deeply connected. And it's really about understanding, as Jesse was saying, what are the things you've been experiencing? What are the observations you've been witnessing? And what are the stories that you grow up with family, the media, at school, so on and so forth, and how all that shapes your personality that develops the habits that you take. You get to a moment where you're unhappy with something like your health. Like Jesse said, it's not an easy feat to take on. It's your responsibility, though. It doesn't matter where it's come from. It does, but it's a part about the ownership taking forward and what value that's going to bring to your life holistically.
Jesse, can you explain to us the significance of GLP-1, especially in terms of how it impacts the brain?
There's a few different ways that it does that, Stephen, but the one thing I'll start off on this point, which is the mind has to believe that it can do something, right? So you have to believe you can be healthy and you can lose the weight. And the problem historically has been that we all know diet and exercise, yes, that's required in overall health and wellness. But for many people, it's really, really challenging to do that. And I think what GLPs allow an individual to do with a structured program and journey is see right away that they're going to be able to be successful and lose that weight. And once your brain makes the shift of, oh, wow, I can do this, the mind and the body start to work in sync, right? So the GLPs, one, they quiet, it's not just food. It's a lot of other addictive behaviors that GLPs actually kind of block the neurosignals from being sent. So your brain can quiet. You don't have that chatter. I'm hungry. Feed me, right? It is really, it's evolutionary in terms of how our brains have worked. Parts of our brain have not evolved the same way other parts has, right? So we're still walking around thinking it's 10,000 years ago and food is scarce. So your body is receiving signals from the mind, eat more. You're hungry. Hold on to the fat because it's cold out. It hasn't evolved. The amygdala has not evolved to know that food is not scarce, right? And we're eating more than we probably should. So it really the GLPs quiet that signal and allow the other techniques and tools that are available to it to learn so that you can actually keep that efficacy. And that's the difference that I think allow GLPs to really show people that success can be had and reached and also sustained.
Yeah, and I think, Jesse, you mentioned it before that it creates this window of opportunity to create some plasticity in the brain to allow change, and then other changes can be made. And going back to that original topic that we talked about was habits, can you talk a little bit about how GLP-1 provides an opportunity to actually reprogram somebody?
So when you think about, there's a term in when we talk about neuroplasticity, which is creating new neural networks, right? And think of a neural network as a highway, and you've got some pretty aggressive and probably bad habits that have been deep ingrained in your brain. They're very deep and very wide. So putting up a detour sign to go around that neural pathway, it takes time. Automaticity takes time and repetition. So what the GLPs, again, in conjunction with a true journey or program like what we do at Heuro Health, the physical body needs about 12 weeks or 3 months to get the physical aspects of the GLP to really get what we call, on your pathway to maintenance. Automaticity is different for every person, but it's somewhere between 9 and 15 months on average for true automaticity to start taking hold. And that means that you've got to do the same positive new behaviors over and over and over. But the GLPs allow you to do that because you're seeing the physical successes. It's not just the emotional success or the mental success. So they have to really work in tandem. And I think that's what's so exciting and profound about GLPs. I've been in healthcare for over 20 years. I've never seen a product that will allow people that cushion to allow them to get that time frame and that duration that's required. So it's really, really exciting. But GLPs, I want to stress, they're not a silver bullet as an independent solution. It's got to be part of a larger part of solution that every person has to play a role in.
Jesse, I believe the GLP-1s then potentially provide an opportunity where you could go through a treatment program on the GLP-1 and then move to a very low, infrequent maintenance dose, or potentially go completely off the drug, which is transformative. Could you talk a little bit about what that vision might look like under a Heuro Health platform?
So, Stephen, it's an excellent point. There's a little bit of a misnomer when you think about the big brands of GLPs. Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, Zepbound, all phenomenal products, all highly effective, but also very costly, right? They are a lot of money to an individual or plan sponsor. But when I say plan sponsor, that means the employer or healthcare cover that's paying for your medication and your healthcare. It's very expensive. And Stephen, you just raised an excellent point. At a certain point, the body reaches it can no longer. It's what we call the plateau sign. Your body will no longer lose any more weight on that GLP. So from a cost perspective, if it's clinically viable to remove you from a GLP because it's no longer, clinically, you've lost all the weight you're going to lose, you can transition someone to a much more lower cost, but still very effective medication so that you still get that added bonus. It's almost like it's like weaning off. You're weaning your mind and your body off. But while you're doing that, that's why we have a 24-month journey, is that if you are adherent and compliant, you will have the tools and the techniques to ultimately what you just said, either one, get onto a lower medication, or two, off medications completely and not have the recidivism that you see today.
Yeah, that's great. Josh, anything come to mind as Jesse's explaining that?
A lot of things. I love most, going back to what you said earlier, Jesse, about the belief. I think anyone that makes a decision, whether they realize it or not, there's some level of belief that they can succeed. And what I see GLP-1s and understanding about Heuro Health is it's like opening the door, but also giving a taste of belief for someone to walk through and equipping them with the mind, the body, the tools to create a level of evidence that they can further cement in the belief of themselves internally to do the work, to get the results, to learn. And then over time, like you mentioned, the journey, it allows them to be focused on self rather than externally, or outsource their power, their ability. And so what I love is just how all this comes together to help empower the person at their core to create a new shift of identity that will lead them to showing up in a congruent manner based on a new value system that's now shifting along with the belief structure that's now evolving.
And Jesse, I know the journey is a critical 12 months followed by a very, very important 12 months. But I would argue that even the start of year 3 and year 4 and year 5, that these people who have rewired these super neural pathways in their brain and they've made amazing progress, that they still may need some help through a journey experience. And can you talk a little bit about what that might look like?
Absolutely. Stephen, before I do, I want to go back to something Josh just said, which is it's such an important part of not just the Heuro journey, but just humanity itself, which is, he said a very key word, identity. Words and thoughts have real consequences. If you say, I'm fat, you've now identified yourself as being fat or obese. And a lot of people have that language. They use those words, and that is now taking away from your self-worth. So it's transitioning, it's getting the mindset from moving to a new identity. But Josh said, so it's not just saying I'm moving to a new identity. It's believing at your core that you can become and are that new identity. And when you make that paradigm shift, that's where the real efficacy starts to come in. To come back to the point you were just making, this isn't a one and done thing. I wish I could sit here and tell you that healthcare and making these tectonic shifts was easy. It's not. It's a lifelong struggle, and it's a lifelong journey. The goal is that in that first 2 years of the journey, can we give you the tools and create the new neural networks that will allow you the highest probability of long-term success? That doesn't mean you're not going to have challenges in year 3, year 4, year 5, and much beyond. Life is hard. So it's easy to fall back to old habits, old neural networks. They're still there. They're not erased. So having this support tool and understanding that, look, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to have a piece of cheesecake. Life happens. It doesn't mean that you're still, that new identity, that new you is still there. But everyone needs a little tune up, a little check in, and a little check up. So having this out, years 3, 4, and 5 is just as important as years 2 and 1 from a long-term point of view.
Yeah, I feel like it's a work in progress, and there's really no final destination, which is why I love the word journey. It's a journey, and there's maybe some pit stops along the way and some milestones that you can celebrate, but it's a journey. And so I think this would apply to other things. Sometimes I'm seeking care like massage therapy or chiropractic care, and I go in with an acute problem, and the acute problem is then addressed, but there's some of these underlying things where I probably should be getting some of that care on a maintenance program. And so rather than show up either to the doctor's office or to the therapist with, these acute presenting problems, that I think our sick care system does a pretty good job of handling acute care. It's the maintenance and the preventative part. So I'd love to hear from Josh and Jesse. Jesse, let's start with you, talking about this concept of proactive care. If you follow Dr. Peter Attia, he has something called Medicine 3.0, and this is let's treat diabetes before it's type 2 diabetes. Let's treat it when you're showing signs of insulin resistance versus the current, again, I'll call it the sick care system, isn't really going to treat you until you have all the biomarkers of type 2 diabetes. And there's really no treatment plan to prevent you from getting there. So Jesse, could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, Stephen, I wish I could tell you that our system was built proactively. We have built a healthcare system and a society that we are excellent at treating the reactive issue. Excellent. But we are woefully inadequate of treating mostly the underlying causes, right? And that comes back to these bad habits, these mental blocks that, really do transform a mental, we talk about baggage, right? Emotional traumas will eventually transform into physical ailments, right? So there's really a three-prong approach, I believe, and I think we believe at Heuro, is that one, you've really got to start to unpack these emotional challenges that could be from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or yesterday, right? So identifying and treating those are paramount. Then there's the proactive side about, well, let's start to engage early on with pre-diabetes and not wait until someone's fully type 2 diabetic, because a lot of time the damage has already been done. And it's really, really hard to reverse these things when it's, you wait that long. So it's a three-prong approach, I believe, that is really required. But again, it comes back to what Josh said earlier. Every person has an obligation to put in the effort and the work, right? People go to the gym every day. Your brain is a muscle too, right? So just like you go to the gym, you've got to put in the effort to train your brain to these new habits, identifying issues, and really clearing out these blockages. And it's paramount to our long-term health and long-term success.
I love this topic. I don't think we have enough time to dive into all the pieces I'm seeing in my mind. But I think what most stands out is two things is, of course, the preventative versus let's address the thing that's presenting a problem now. But the two things that come to mind is, getting to the root cause. And that's something that I've become obsessed with. And that's led me down to the nervous system work, which I know, Jesse, the first time you and I met, we got deep in conversation of nervous system, quantum physics, all those things. But when you get to understand and educate yourself, it creates a level of awareness to who you are, how you're showing up, and why you're doing that from the past. And we have these experiences that don't get fully processed, and that leads to an emotional wound. Some call it trauma, some call it a wound. And then that dictates our personality, which creates our personal reality. And I know we share a common respect for Dr. Joe Dispenza, and that's some of his language. And so that tying the second point I wanted to address that you mentioned was, I feel like we in the society get so fixated on results, and we reward results, and we forget about the work that's to get to those results and the work that's to maintain those results. And so when you pair, diving into the root cause, and let's look at what it takes in a more proactive, but then also a sustainability manner, and you pair those, that's what I understand that you guys are doing, which is what I love, because that addresses the problem, not the presenting problem that is evidence that people can see. It's always something deeper that's more ingrained in who we are. And also who we are doesn't have to be forever, because once you create awareness of something, you don't have to be that thing, depending on how much you truly want to change and believe you can change.
Comes back to identity, Josh, right? It's who am I today and who do I want to be tomorrow? Who do I believe I can be? It's profound.
Yeah, and Josh opened up my eyes to the concept of inputs being more important than outputs. And do you really trust and believe in the process? Are you invested in the process? I think everybody's experienced maybe a New Year's resolution, which I don't recommend anyone adopting any of that. But let's say you do that, and what do? You tighten up your diet, you go to the gym, and then you hop on the scale and you expect these immediate results. Well, you may actually gain weight. Well, I mean, our bodies fluctuate, 5 pounds here or there all the time. And then that is what you believe in. So you're believing in the outcome. And now you're thinking, well, wait a minute, maybe tightening up the diet, clean eating, and then that additional movement and exercise, maybe that's not what I need to be doing. So I think you have to believe in the inputs and ultimately, adopt real change. And that's changing your behavior, and then trust the process and know that it's going to be probably a function of consistency versus just intensity. There's some great examples there. Like I think you could brush your teeth, once a week for 10 minutes, or you can brush your teeth, a couple of times a day for, about a minute or so. And it's the consistency that's going to keep your teeth and gums healthy, not the intensity. And I think that's true for most of our things that we're trying to address in our life that's related to performance. And I would say our health is a performance metric. And it's really hard to perform when you're not healthy. I'd love to talk about stress. So for me, stress is the great multiplier to make things really bad, and how stress can impact our lower brain, our monkey brain, these primal urges. Jesse, could you talk about the impact of stress on the Heuro Journey?
Well, it's larger than just the Heuro Journey because, Stephen, from all the things that you just said, it's stress is a multiplier. Life is hard, and stress makes it, substantially and significantly harder. One of the things, just to come back to actually, Stephen, what you were just talking about, but again, pertaining to stress, we've come into a system where it's either you've succeeded or you failed, right? Let's just use your example about the New Year's resolutions. If you have this very rigid, pass fail, most people are going to fail, right? And then what ends up happening is that your brain now says, well, I don't like that feeling. I'm going to do everything that I can to prevent that feeling again. So you start to create this identity, and the stress of that performance-based, am I good enough to do it? Am I good enough to succeed? You're adding, it's hard enough to do it on your own. And then when you layer on stress, it makes it so much more difficult to get and stay healthier. But then it also has such consequential impacts in a negative way on all of the other issues and comorbidities that are associated with underlying, whether you're obese or whatever it is. It has such a ripple effect. You don't sleep as well. You tend to eat more poorly. You might drink more alcohol. There's a momentum, and not in a positive way, that stress just actually makes those things happen much faster and much more substantial. So really learning the tools and the techniques of how do I deal with stress? Stress is going to happen, but how you appropriately deal with it and not fall back into the same behavior patterns is a challenge, but I would argue is really, really important to understand stress, and then two, understand how to cope with it if you really want to take wellness and health to the next level.
Josh, how does stress get interwoven with your work?
It's similar to how Jesse explained it, and that's part of Steve and I preparing for today. That's what one of the ideas I wanted to share or to get your input on was how stress distorts our ability to use our higher functioning brain to make those choices that are aligned with the outcomes or congruent with the outcomes that we want, rather than the brain going to survival mode and doing what it can to create a homeostasis environment. And so then we make these decisions to feel good now that we then beat ourselves up for later, because going back to, the guilt of doing it, or now I don't have the outcome I wanted, so on and so forth. So I really think that the idea here is, as you said, tools to cope with stress, not what I've learned that I used to do a lot, which was great in those BMX times, but was override the emotion, the stress, whether it was fear, guilt, shame, anger that was creating the stress response. I would override it with mental components, mental reframes, the mindset gymnastics, and then I'd abandon myself. And then those problems would go into other areas of my life in terms of still living with stress, because I wasn't focusing on the nervous system, which getting a little into the weeds here, but that's one of the things I wanted to hear you explain was how stress plays a part in this. And you did beautifully. And it's my understanding that we should focus more on the information that we have to gain from the stress response we have, not what solutions or tactics can we do to minimize it now, but really what's going on at the root. How is my nervous system perceiving the environment as a threat that's now creating this emotion that is then driving the behavior?
Yeah, and I think some of it just comes into recognition. Can you recognize that something stressful is happening to you in real time? And can you just put it in a bucket and then give yourself a little bit extra time, which is this upper brain, this is like all your reasoning, to kind of counteract the lower primal brain and potentially counteract those primal urges that you may have, which may be rooted in things like self-preservation, which really don't apply in modern society. We don't have a saber-toothed tiger kind of chasing us right now. And we have a pretty much a limitless, tasty food supply. So we're not gonna die of hunger. And I don't want to diminish people suffering from hunger issues. But for the most of the world, that is not the issue. We have an abundance of tasty food. So I think just recognizing and then giving time, which is why I love practicing yoga, because it's a breathing practice primarily, and it's a meditative practice primarily. And it just gives your upper brain time to process it and then approach things not with judgment, but with curiosity. And I think once you open the door to being curious, what happens? You ask questions. And we start asking questions to people like Jesse and Josh, you're going to get some phenomenal answers to make progress. So I think that's really important. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the addiction aspect of obesity and the addiction treatment that GLP-1s can provide, and potentially create new indications for smoking cessation, other addictive areas. Jesse, could you kind of lead us in that, what you feel GLP-1s are with respect to addiction, and how obesity is likely just an addiction to food?
Yeah, we're already seeing, what other addictions, whether it's gambling, smoking, drinking, the signals that the brain sends out, the GLPs, it's not just obesity, right? It is any addictive behavior. Your mind is sending the body signals. We don't really understand the full rationale why, other than maybe these things feel good, right? So there's a dopamine release. There's all kinds of theories about exactly why addictive behavior becomes so prevalent. And certain people actually are much more susceptible to it. But the GLPs actually block those signals from being sent. So we call it quieting the mind. But it's really, really, we're just scratching the surface on what some of these other addictive behaviors that could be treated in addition to obesity. We're seeing it just naturally through people are reporting, hey, I'm feeling less, I don't have that feeling I need to go gamble, or I need to go drink, or whatever the addictive behavior it is. Those signals are also lessening by the use of GLPs. So it's a very exciting, time we're in. I think GLPs are going to, they'll continue this revolution of how we think about healthcare. But I do want to be careful though. GLPs are not a silver bullet, right? It's not press the easy button and I'm going to solve all my problems just by taking a GLP. They're very, very powerful medications. They really require clinical supervision, not just of a doctor, but of a whole clinical team. And that's what, again, I'm not trying to, pitch Heuro, but it really does. You've got to think about, these are very important decisions that you and your clinical team need to make, and making sure that if you decide that a GLP is right for you for obesity or type 2 diabetes, or now even sleep, there are some repercussions and some consequences. So making sure that you have the resources and the tools to manage that becomes really, really important.
Josh, any commentary on your practice with regards to addiction? How do you view that, and how do you view that state of mind?
What I love what Jesse said was getting to the root of what's going on, and GLP-1s almost offer a door being opened, and then Heuro is integrating the work and supporting the person moving forward. So I love that. And that's a similar approach I take with the clients I work with. Now, if someone's dealing with an addiction challenge, that's not my specialty. So I would definitely refer them to a professional that does support that line of work that is beyond my scope. But that being said, when there is addictive tendencies that aren't a licensed medical professional's role, what I do to help is address the question of, well, starting with, okay, we may label this choice as bad, unhealthy, harmful, whatever. That's less interesting to me. What's interesting is, what do you get from this choice? Now let's trace that back to the lack of that feeling you have in your life. And then we can go back in the past and see where these events have created that lack. And it's really looking at the void. And we talk about, voids breed values. And so when you lack something, you create an unconscious value that then creates a belief system that fuels the identity. So that's the approach I take. It's like, let's get to what you're getting from this choice, whether it be food or escapism or anything, and let's see where we can create more of that we will agree in a quote unquote healthier manner that is congruent for the person's lifestyle. So to be clear, if it's something serious, that's what I outsource to a licensed professional.
Yeah, I love that concept of the void. I think as a society with our smartphones, we've really not practiced how to be bored or how to have silence and just have this emptiness for a moment. It may trigger loneliness, it may trigger fear. And I see people just kind of grabbing their cell phone and trying to just go to social media or to just make themselves busy. So I do feel like we could have a whole separate podcast on the void. We should embrace those moments. Sometimes a void can create spontaneous creative thoughts that can really make an advancement in a problem you're trying to solve. So I embrace those little moments where I'm actually finding myself to be a little bit bored or a little bit lonely and just kind of think through those things. And I think addiction sometimes is people are trying to fill that void with something that ultimately is harming them. And most times, if they analyze it, they want to stop, but because they're filling that void and they're getting something out of it, it's a tough loop to interrupt.
I would actually, void has somewhat of a negative connotation to it. It's actually, your inner self is constantly trying to guide you. It's trying to give you what you should be doing. The problem is, Stephen, you just mentioned it. We are so inundated by external signals, right? It's like our radio frequency. We can't hear our inner self and what it's trying to guide us to and teach us. And it's scary for a lot of people, right? That moment of silence where you can listen to yourself. People are petrified because we've grown up in the fear of missing out on what I don't know. But if people could just take 5 minutes and really go in and internalize, call it the gap, call it the void, call it whatever you want to call it, but listen to what your body and your mind is trying to tell you. And it gets a lot easier from there. So anyone that is, I always say, where do you want to start in your wellness journey? 5 minutes of meditation every single day, non-negotiable. Start with that and see where that takes you, and you build upon it. And Stephen, to your point, it actually becomes where people start to get nervous. It actually becomes one of the most prolific, beautiful things in an individual's day. Certainly in mine, I meditate 30 minutes every day. It's my favorite time of day. So it's, but I used to be the same way. I couldn't stand the quiet because it was just, there was too much external commotion. But again, it's coming back to, you've got to retrain your brain. How do you view that? Is that a positive or is it a negative? Are you scared of the quiet and the void? Or are you going to look at it as some beautiful quiet time? And it comes back to identity and how you view things.
Yeah, that's great. I love how we put that together.
A couple of thoughts, and I'd like to hear Josh's thoughts on this too, because I know this is near and dear to his heart. But, we've gotten into a cycle where if you think about it's factory farming on grand scales, right? The nutrient value in soil and food that's produced in the countries, it's basically like eating cardboard. There is none, right? So the foods that we eat, 80% of it, highly processed, refined. Sugars are not the enemy. You eat a piece of fruit, that's not a refined sugar. Your body processes refined sugars vastly different than it does, glucose and other types of things. So sugars necessarily aren't the enemy, but it's the type of sugars that we're eating and the types of foods that we're eating. And unfortunately, the system is built as, well, of course you're going to get sick. Of course, you're not getting the nutritional value. And then all of a sudden, well, let's give you a medication. And oh, by the way, this medication is going to give you this side effect, so take this medication. And before you know it, you're on 8 different medications and you're feeling horrible. Well, why? Because you're not giving your body anything that it's really requiring. So getting back and fixing the food system, Stephen and Josh, I cannot say how important that really is. I know that's a tall order, but I applaud anyone of any political nature. It's the right thing to do, and it's required if we're really going to fix healthcare.
Yeah, we're pretty passionate at it in our house. My wife is running a regenerative organic farm as a demonstration primarily, and also a way to educate our children as well as the people closest to us. And Jesse, I know your family has a farming background and history. And so I think just being close to where our food comes from is certainly important. And then ultimately, if you're struggling with obesity, this is something that you're going to want to address because it's one of those root causes, right? I mean, if your food intake is, problematic and it's causing the problem or contributing to the problem in a major way, you want to address the root cause and just not ignore it, and then just rely on the medicine to do all the work. Going to that topic real quick, Jesse, could you talk about how you get someone in the Heuro Journey to be accountable to show up, either through some type of pre-qualification or ongoing qualification process, and why that's important?
Yeah, absolutely. We in healthcare today, to get qualified for a GLP or really any medication that we'll call specialty, you have to do what's called a pre-qualification, right? So you've got to do a certain set of actions once. Once you've done those actions, you're qualified. You're now authorized to have that medication. So it's sort of like the life insurance industry, right? You get a medical exam once and then you're good. You can do anything you want after that. That doesn't work, right? People have to have accountability. They have to have responsibility, and you've got to take responsibility for your own actions or non-actions, right? So at Heuro, what we've done is we call it continuous authorization. That means that you need to do daily, weekly, monthly items, but those actions and items are going to allow you to create the new neural network. Then your plan sponsor should and could continue to pay for these very expensive medications and also the Heuro Journey. It's only when you're not doing those items and those occurrences, if you're not compliant, you're not adherent, then the plan sponsor shouldn't be obligated to pay for it, right? So if you're doing what you're supposed to do and you're saying, hey, I'm going to be responsible, then the financial cost and the financial responsibility should be equal to the plan sponsor. So but it has to be in parallel. It can't be, well, I want my plan sponsor to pay for it no matter what I do. That's not really that's the model today, and it's not working.
Josh, how do you approach your clientele in terms of making sure they're showing up and doing the work and doing this concept of like continuous authorization with you? I think when Josh and I first met, it was like, can I just pay you a ton of money and then get washboard boy band abs? And Josh is like, there's no amount of money you can pay me to make that happen. I'm not going to do the work for you. So Josh, could you talk a little bit about what your approach is and how you want to bring people in, but that they got to meet you halfway or they've got to show up to do the work?
There's a couple components. So Jesse, you mentioned like the vetting process to enter the journey, and then there's accountability components to maintain that journey. And so it's similar for my clients, and it all goes back to we were talking about earlier with the food supply, children in school, the meals. The environment plays the biggest role of impact on our cells and how we show up and respond to the environment. So something I facilitate, sounds like Heuro facilitates, is an environment that's supportive and also holds people to a standard that is going to allow them to do the thing to reach the goal that they want. And I think having that supportive system of the environment is the most crucial piece.
Yeah, and who you hang out with and who you call your friends and who you spend time with is your environment, and that's a choice. And I like to hang out with nerds like Josh and Jesse who are obsessed with, wellness and longevity and, giving back to society to the extent possible. And I think the Heuro Journey, Jesse, what you're doing, certainly Josh with all the coaching and mindset work that you're doing, you're pushing people towards excellence, which is way above average, which is, I think, what people need to aim for, especially in today's world. So, Jesse, I'd like to thank you for all the insights. Josh, the color was fantastic. Always appreciate that. Thank you, everyone, for another episode of The Orange Tea, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us on The Orange Tea. Remember, at Kymanox, we believe in small, capable, T-shaped teams driving innovation and progress through broad and deep thinking. Stay connected with us on LinkedIn, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on YouTube or your favorite listening app. For more information about Kymanox, visit Kymanox.com. That's Kymanox.com. Let's continue building and growing together with intention. Until next time on the Orange Team.